Hey, everybody. Thank you for coming. Thanks so much. I'm Sue Hatch. I'm on the seminar committee. And I'm not here to introduce Stacy Scott because she doesn't need an introduction. I want you, but I do want to just explain that the reason we have this microphone is for those folks who are on Zoom. So when you want to ask a question, if you just wait until I get to you with the microphone, then we're good and they'll be able to hear you too on Zoom. So that's my whole part. And could we have a round of applause and welcome Stacy Scott, our public defender.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Zoom. Can you hear me? I guess you can't tell me because I don't know if they're responding or not, but I'm sure they'll tell me if you can't. So good morning, everyone. It's really cool to be here. As some of you may know, I'm also a member of UCG and have been. Don't come as much as I should, but it's been a place that's been very close to my heart for many, many years. And so it's really cool to be here to speak to you all because I feel like you're my people. This is my community. And so I'm very pleased to be here to talk to you about public defenders, who we are, what we do, and why we're important. I'm also going to talk about just some of the trending criminal justice issues that are coming up in this legislative session. That part of the seminar, you may want to, pour yourself a whiskey and start to brace yourself for that part. But first I want to talk about something that's really important to me, which is the mission of public defenders. So most of you know this, or many of you would know this about me. I've been the elected public defender for the 8th Circuit since 2010. Prior to that, I was an assistant public defender, and I also did about 3 years as an assistant state attorney. So I've been kind of on almost all aspects of the criminal justice system. I'm a double gator. Went to law school here and actually started out as an intern in the public defender's office in the 8th Circuit, working for our longtime public defender, the late Rick Parker, who really was a dear friend and really helped pave the way for me as the elected public defender, taking over for him when he retired and then later passed away. So all kudos to Rick, who was a mentor to me and a good friend. So public defenders, who are we? Why do we exist? We defend people who are charged with crimes who cannot afford to hire an attorney. And we also represent people on some select civil matters where they are entitled to court-appointed representation. So we represent everyone from kids who are charged with crimes all the way through representing people in death penalty cases. So there's a lot of work there. It's very important work. And prior to the case of Gideon v. Wainwright, which was handed down by the Supreme Court in 1963, there was no public defender system in the United States. So the Constitution provided for people to have the right to counsel. You had the right to bring counsel into court, but what it didn't provide for specifically was what happens if someone is facing a loss of liberty and they can't afford to hire an attorney to bring into court with them. And so prior to Gideon, only people who were charged with capital offenses or under certain very limited special circumstances could someone get a court-appointed attorney if they couldn't afford to hire one. So Gideon changed all that. Clarence Earl Gideon was a kind of a petty criminal, not a hero in and of himself, but his case was heroic, and what it stands for is definitely heroic. He was charged with burglarizing a pool hall in Panama City, Florida. And when he came before the court, he said, I would like to have an attorney appointed to represent me because I can't afford one, and I think I have a right to have an attorney appointed. And the judge instructed him, no, you do not have that right, and I'm sorry, I can't do that. So he went to trial, he lost, he was convicted, sentenced to the maximum punishment, and sent right over here to Florida State Prison at Rayford. And while he was in prison is where he wrote an appeal to the United States Supreme Court and arguing that he was entitled to have a lawyer appointed to represent him. And the Supreme Court agreed and changed the law. And the Supreme Court finally recognized that the Sixth Amendment right to counsel was a fundamental right, and that lawyers weren't luxuries. Lawyers are necessities in order for someone to receive a fair trial. So it was up to the states to decide how to implement that mandate, and each state really has a different system, and some states don't even have a system. They just appoint court-appointed cases to private lawyers who agree to take them. But Florida, in my opinion, got it right when we instituted a statewide public defender system that's funded primarily by the state of Florida. So there's 20 judicial circuits in the state of Florida. There's 20 elected state attorneys, and there's 20 elected public defenders. And so in our region is the 8th Judicial Circuit, which is composed of 6 counties. We have Baker, Bradford, Levy, Gilchrist, Union, and Alachua. So it's a pretty big circuit and very diverse circuit. And so we handle all of the cases that are appointed to us. And I would say that's probably about 75% of all the criminal cases that come to court. People qualify for the public defender and are appointed to the public defender. And in juvenile, that's even higher because kids, they don't have any money, and that actually the parents don't have any obligation to hire them counsel. So we handle the overwhelming majority of juvenile cases in our circuit. So how many cases is that? Well, the good news is, I guess, that the number of cases has gone down over the last 10 years. So 10 years ago, we were appointed to roughly 23,000 cases a year in the 8th Circuit alone. The last fiscal year, that number was around 15,000. So that's been a good thing. I think it follows the trends of, generally speaking, crime rates have gone down over the last decade. I don't know where they are now. They seem maybe to be ticking up in some particular categories, but nevertheless, we were appointed to about 15,000 cases. Statewide, last year, the public defenders were appointed to 521,000 cases statewide. And that's new cases. So that's cases that were appointed during a fiscal year, which for the state of Florida is July 1 to June 30th. That's not counting the cases that carry over from fiscal year to fiscal year. So the load that public defenders are bearing is the new cases plus the ones that were pending when they got a new case. Statewide, we've represented 431,000 new clients in this last fiscal year. So in the 8th Circuit, I'm funded, like I said, primarily by the state. We have about 75 full-time positions for the whole circuit, and about 40 of those are attorney positions. So that's 40 attorneys in the whole circuit to handle our 15,000 cases. We are funded by the state of Florida, so our budget from the state of Florida is about $7.5 million, and most of that, like 96% of that, is salaries and benefits, and that's true statewide. So this statewide, the public defenders have about a $287 million total budget out of the entire state budget. About $240 million of that is actual cash, general revenue, and about $42 million of it is what we call trust fund authority, which, you know how, like, if you get a speeding ticket, there's all kinds of little fees collected, and the statutes provide for part of those fees to go to different parts of the civil and criminal justice system. So part of that fee goes into a public defender trust fund, and we have some cash there and authority to spend it depending on the collections. So as I mentioned, 96% of that money goes to just salaries and benefits. So all of our employees are state employees, members of the Florida retirement system, which is really the only way we can hire anyone, right? And I know that we're not unique in the struggle that we have of low salaries. I know law enforcement has that struggle. State attorneys have that struggle because the wages are low, the benefits are really good, but when you're hiring, 24, 25-year-old people out of law school, they're never going to get sick, they're never going to get old, and they don't really care. And they just show me the money, right? And so that's the difficulty, kind of segues into some of the difficulties that we're facing as public defenders. We're having a huge turnover rate statewide. It jumped up to 28% from about 17%, and then even lower than that in years past. So here in Gainesville, for example, where most of our attorneys are, because this is the biggest, it's about 65% of our cases are from Alachua County as opposed to the remaining counties in our circuit. Our turnover is historically pretty low because Gainesville rocks, right? And everybody wants to live in Gainesville, or maybe has a partner or a spouse associated with the university. So recruitment and retention has never been a big issue for our circuit until now. Really, until COVID is really the onset of COVID is where it started. But also, you know, whenever the economy is doing really well, public defender and state attorney offices suffer because people are poaching our lawyers who we've trained, who we've invested a lot in. And then they're like, hey, if you walk over here tomorrow, you can have better working conditions and make $20,000 more a year. So that's where the turnover comes from. So historically, our turnover in the 8th Circuit Public Defender's Office is maybe 8%. And like I said, last year, statewide, it was 28%. And here we were at 18%, which is a huge jump for us. Starting salaries for assistant public defenders are $50,000 a year. Yeah, plus benefits. That's what's authorized in the Appropriations Act, and that's what we're funded to pay. Public defenders have had to increase that starting salary with money within our own budget, just to try to recruit people and retain people so that the entire system doesn't collapse. Because if you don't have public defenders, cases can't move through the system. You know, you have to have state attorneys and you have to have public defenders in order to make this massive load of criminal cases move through the system, so that victims can get justice, so that defendants can get their cases adjudicated and get justice for themselves as well. So there's been a lot of backlog that's been created by turnover and COVID. Now, COVID kind of shut down the criminal justice system, as it did a lot of things in our communities. But here in the 8th Circuit, we kind of got back going pretty fast on handling the cases, because criminal justice is really an in-person operation. You can't have Zoom justice in the criminal justice system. You really have to be in person. So we've worked through the COVID backlog, but now we're dealing with this turnover backlog. So, you know, every time an assistant public defender leaves to go to, generally speaking, private practice, or maybe even another governmental entity like the county or the city who pay more than we do, we have to reassign those cases. Those attorneys have to go back over the entire case, all the depositions, the police reports. They have to develop a relationship with the defendant. They have to get up to speed, and then the case can get going again. So cases get delayed every time an assistant public defender or an assistant state attorney leaves, and the cases get distributed out. So that's the crisis that we're facing. We have about 251 vacant assistant public defender positions statewide. And that's out of only about 1,600 positions statewide. So that's a pretty high vacancy rate. Like I already mentioned, it's a high turnover. Think about the housing crisis that we have here in our community and in other communities like Miami and Tampa and Orlando, where it's even worse. People who work for public defender offices and state attorneys offices have to have somewhere to live, and it's become increasingly impossible for them to do that on the wages that are offered by the state of Florida. So what we're asking the legislature to do is to focus on us and on state attorneys. We have a joint ask with them this year to increase assistant public defender salaries by $15,000 per position. Does that solve the problem totally? No, but it's a giant step in the right direction to try to attract people to our jobs and to keep people in our jobs just a little bit longer. We don't expect everyone to stay forever. You know, people will move on, but we need to keep people longer so that we can get a continuity in our office and get people who are trained enough to be able to handle the more serious cases, right? You can't put a brand new attorney on a murder case, you know, and so we're really losing a lot of people within this 0 to 3 year mark. And now even the 0 to 5 year mark is where we're losing people to the point where we don't have anybody on the bench. You know, we've worked through all the ABCD quarterback, and now we don't, you know, we have the guy who's like, you know, in 8th grade trying to, you know, be quarterback for the Gators. So it's a real problem statewide. And we're, you know, really takes dedication to do this work. It's not easy. You know, you have to go in jails, you have to go in prisons, you're dealing with clients who don't always trust you or like you, and you're, you know, delivering a lot of bad news to them, and you have to have a real fire in your heart to be able to do this work. And those are the people we're looking for. And those people also need to be able to make enough money to live, to have a livable wage. So I feel like I've talked a lot about numbers and budgets, which now is sounding really boring, but does anybody have any questions about that? Carol.
You mentioned
The county contribution. Yes.
how they have been run.
Yes. So Carol, I'll repeat the question.
Oh, you repeated.
Yeah.
Which is really important, especially the last, we've done the last account.
Yes.
Well, I'm actually through it.
Okay.
Oh, interesting. If you just
Yeah.
repeat the question, that's. gonna
Sure.
make it easier. Yeah.
So Carol's question was, what about the county's contribution to this, to the state attorney and to the public defender offices? So the counties do have an obligation to provide us with an office space and with things like IT expenses and phones and electricity. And that's, Carol could probably tell you better, but when that came into being, it was because of Article 5 that was passed. So they do have that obligation. And I can tell you this, Alachua County does an amazing job of taking care of us. Okay. Your tax dollars are well spent with Alachua County. And they, as you know, if you've been downtown, about 6 years ago, they built us a building just for the public defenders. Previously, we'd been housed in a really kind of rundown yet quaint building across from the top on Main Street. But they showed their commitment to our mission as public defenders by building us a beautiful office building right next to the criminal courthouse, which has really been a game changer for us and for our clients, honestly. So the county also provides an IT budget for us so that computers, internet access, some computer storage. So they, you know, like they really help us out. The other counties in our circuit are smaller and they don't have as much funding. So, you know, you really see the difference between what Alachua County can and does provide for us compared to some of the smaller counties, because they just don't have the population base to be able to afford it. Yes.
Stacy, you mentioned like we try to attract that have that fire in the heart.
Mhm.
Obviously, you've been at it for.
Yes.
and how does it-
It is hard. So the question is, how do you, and me personally, maintain your spirit to keep doing this work, you know, over the course of many years? And it can be challenging. And I think that people find out pretty quickly when they first come to work for us, if it's something that is what they thought it would be, you know, because when you think about sort of the ivory tower concept of public defense, you know, you're defending people's rights, you're keeping the government in check, you're making sure the Constitution is upheld. We do those things, and those things are very important. But on the day-to-day basis, it can be a real grind with high caseloads and just the reality of there's a lot of sadness and there's a lot of trauma, and you see a lot of the bad things that happen in our community, whether it's, you know, what happened to a victim, or you see a defendant, you know, who his whole life has been filled with traumas from the time they were a child. You see unaddressed mental health issues that now have culminated in someone being involved in the criminal justice system. So all those things can really weigh you down, and you have to, first of all, you have to know that it's for you, right? There's a fire in my heart for helping people. That's what I like to do. And I really do feel like I make a difference, not only on a personal level with the clients, but on a systemic level, making sure that the people in the role of assistant public defender and elected public defender, they have your back, that we're making sure that we do our jobs right, that we're doing our best to hold the state attorney's office accountable, the police accountable. And part of what I do as the elected public defender is a lot of advocacy in Tallahassee, not mostly on budget, because I'm the statewide appropriations chairman for the public defenders, but also on substantive issues. So we're monitoring all the bills that are coming out and saying, okay, well, is there something we can do about this one? Can we go meet with the sponsor to try to tweak that? So that's sort of my new passion, right? I've changed from being a direct representation attorney, we would call line attorney, into getting more into like the policy issues, and also caring for our employees and trying to make their lives better and make the office the best it can be. So everyone finds their own way to deal with sort of the burnout factor that can happen. You know, I think a work-life balance is really important. I think it's probably similar to what I imagine like being an emergency room physician, you know, must deal with. You know, you're just seeing all these people come in, they're hurt, they're, you know, and you're there to try to fix the problem as best you can with the resources you have, knowing that they're going to move on to some other phase that you can't really help them with. And so I feel like we're like on the front lines of justice. And you know, trial lawyers in general are super competitive, and we really like the highs and the lows, apparently. You know, like when you have a trial and you win, it's the best feeling in the world. When you have a trial and you lose, it's the worst feeling in the world. But there's probably something a little bit addictive about that process that keeps people going too. It's a very long-winded answer to your question, but yes, sir.
I believe I read that in addition to salary, are there some other proposed changes to the program? I think I read an article about that.
Like, can you be more
I don't
specific?
remember what it was.
Okay, well, our primary issue this year is salary. We do have one local issue that jointly with the state attorney's office, we've been trying to get additional positions to help staff a circuit-wide diversion program to try to keep people out of the criminal justice system and from having a criminal case number associated with their name. That we had Brian Kramer, the state attorney, and I had that issue last year. It hasn't been picked up or funded, but we're doing it anyway, but primarily in Alachua County. We haven't been able to expand it dramatically to the other counties because of staffing issues. That's the primary issue that we have. We're also advocating, along with all other state employees, for your basic cost of living increase for state employees. I mean, last year there was a 5.38 increase that was statewide for all state employees, but the problem was the inflation rate was closer to 8.3. So, you know, we're trying, and I think there is a proposal in the governor's budget recommendations for a 5% across the board increase for most state workers. That's in his recommendations that just came out. Yes.
In that case, physicians often use physician extenders, physician PAs, and practitioners. Legal extenders who have that same level actually settle cases or work on a team.
Yeah. So the question is, like in emergency rooms, there might be nurses and PAs that assist the doctor and help carry the heavy load of the number of cases coming through the emergency room. And do we have something similar? Not really. So the Florida bar has pretty strict rules about who can give legal advice and who can speak in court on behalf of a client. So we have certified legal interns that are law school students who've met certain prerequisites and have passed the background check with the Florida bar, who are authorized to be able to speak in court, but still everything they do has to be under the direct supervision of an attorney who is in the courtroom with them. So they do assist us tremendously, and we have expanded our intern and extern programs all the way down to undergrad to try to help us process through some of the not direct client contact issues and tasks that we have. For example, I know that Sheriff Darnell could speak to this, but there's a tremendous increase in the amount of electronic media associated with one criminal case. And that's primarily through body cams and dash cams and police vehicles. You know, there's cameras all over the city. So every case that comes in, there's a multitude of electronic media that has to be reviewed. We would be remiss in our duties if we didn't review that electronic evidence. So we do have interns and externs and CLIs that help us with that review. They watch all of the videos, which a lot of times there's really nothing happening. I mean, just think about one DUI stop. You might have 4 dash cams on that stop and a body cam. All that has to be looked at. Most of it is a lot of dead space, but you have to go through it. And so we'll have interns sort of transcribing it and time stamping, you know, well, here's something that the lawyer needs to look at because this could be of legal significance. And so we have assistants like that, but we don't really have paralegals the way that civil law firms have paralegals. And in part, that's because we can barely afford to pay the people that we have. So did you follow up? Yes, so we do have legal support assistants, like legal assistants. They are not highly trained like you might, someone who could draft their own motions and things like that. They're more helping us keep our files, support the lawyers in setting depositions, answering the phone, you know, things of that nature. We do have an electronic case management system, which actually Rick Parker was the first public defender in the state to start to transition to electronic case management. And that has been tremendously helpful in cutting down on the amount of just sort of menial like filing work. I mean, we kept paper files in rooms, and now it's all, we have an intake division that helps scan all our files in, and it's really streamlined our process. And we've been able, actually through attrition, reduce the number of support staff at direct legal support staff and increase the number of attorneys in the courtroom, because I felt like that's where I wanted to lower attorney caseloads, so cases per attorney. And I felt like this is where the rubber really meets the road. So I've kind of shifted some of the FTE towards the attorneys. Yes.
Two-part question. How optimistic are you? Yes, for that increase. And the second part of the question.
Yes. So the question is, am I hopeful about getting increases for assistant public defenders with the supermajority Republican legislature, and who's leading the charge for that? So I'll answer the second part first. Yeah, I'm the vice president of the Florida Public Defender Association and the appropriations chairman. So I feel like I am leading the charge with great assistance from our president, who is the public defender from Miami-Dade County, Carlos Martinez, and the public defender from Tampa, Julie Holt. We have worked together as a team, and we're all Democrats, okay? But we have worked together as a team for a number of years, and we have achieved great success even in the Republican legislature. So for example, last year, we were able to get increases for assistant public defenders and assistant state attorneys, because we always include them. They don't always include us, but we always include them because we understand that their issues are exactly the same as ours. So last year we were able to get, it was basically in addition to the cost of living that all state workers got, we were able to get $5,000 per attorney for all assistant state attorneys and assistant public defenders statewide. And then there was a little bit extra that was at the discretion of the elected official that they could give to their people who were high performing, which amounted to about $2,000 or $2,500 per attorney. So that doesn't sound like a lot, okay? As we're sitting here thinking about what in the private world bonuses might look like or pay raises might look like, but that was the biggest one-time increase that I've ever seen since I've been working in appropriations for the public defenders. So This year, our ask is really big. Okay, last year our ask was for $10,000 per attorney, and we got it pretty close, right? Especially if you count the cost of living. This year our ask is bigger because the reality is that especially in these bigger cities, they're just losing people left and right. I think Carlos Martinez last fiscal year had like a 40-something% turnover rate in attorneys. So the problem is real. I think the legislature understands our problem and they want to help. I think the difficulty is that there's so many other priorities out there, and so how much money are they going to put into that pot? I mean, because nobody's going to hold a press conference and say, I got money for public defenders. That's not what they want to say at a press conference. They want to say, I got money for law enforcement. I got money for, children who are abandoned or abused or neglected, or, those are things that go really well in a soundbite. Getting people to understand how important we are and that the funding of us is integral to the functioning of the criminal justice system. That's a little more nuanced and that's harder, but I'm very hopeful that they will get us something. I doubt it will be that. We knew we were kind of pie in the sky and asking for that, but if you don't tell people what you need, they're not going to know, right? And so if I go up there and ask for $5,000 when I need $25,000 per attorney, they're going to be like, well, why didn't you tell us this before? So we tried to be very data driven on like what are the average salaries of assistant public defenders, assistant state attorneys compared to other states, compared to other governmental entities. We're never going to compete directly with the private market, but our hope is that we can get people and hold them. If we can hold them 5 years, then we really get our money's worth, because we invest a lot in training these young attorneys. And if we can hold them longer than we have been, then we'll be in better shape. So the governor's budget recommendations that just recently rolled out do not include public defenders, but we are working very hard to get him to understand that we're equal partners in the justice system and that we're equally important. And his recommendations are just that. They're policy statements, political statement. And I think the legislature understands, they're the budgeting entity, and I think they understand the issue and the need. Yes, ma'am. Well, unfortunately, they're not. Okay, so on paper, they have the same starting salary of $50,000. But if you look at the data from the Justice Administrative Commission, it's the sort of umbrella agency that oversees state attorneys, public defenders, and some other aspects of the criminal justice system. We're already assistant state attorneys make about $5,000 more on average than assistant public defenders. So if the state attorneys were to be increased and not public defenders, then that would really create a real imbalance in the criminal justice ecosystem that I think that the legislature understands that that's not going to work. Like you can't do that. And so I'm very hopeful that at the end of the day, which, our issues are almost always resolved at the very end of session, because that's when all the budget conference issues come up, especially big dollar issues like salary increases. I'm hopeful that we'll have some parity. Hope springs eternal. Yes.
How do you guys interface with because you're kind of a nonprofit thing.
Right. We don't really interface with them with nonprofits like Three Rivers and there's other nonprofits that assist people, and they do mostly civil, right? So there's no budget interaction or direct interaction. Now, certainly we share clients in common, and also a lot of victims in criminal cases need assistance from Three Rivers with housing and family law matters, and so there's an overlap of the people that we represent, and we try to have communication, on a case by case basis, but they're really two separate parallel systems. I have no idea what time it is, but I would like to.
7 after.
Okay.
So if there's something that you would like to talk about that we can help with, if it really is on your heart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to do one bad news thing and one good news thing. How about that? Okay. Well, maybe it's not bad news, depending on your view. So death penalty. Florida has the death penalty. The Public Defender Association is opposed to the death penalty. And there were recent Supreme Court rulings that United States Supreme Court rulings that we felt were a step in the right direction on death penalty law, which required juries who recommend the death penalty had to be unanimous. Okay, we all know that a jury finding someone guilty or not guilty has to be unanimous. Death penalty law prior to the United States Supreme Court case Hearst, you didn't have to have a unanimous jury. So a jury could say 8-4, we recommend death, and the judge could impose the death penalty. So Hearst changed that and said, nope, you got to be unanimous on your death penalty recommendation. And so public defenders who fight these capital cases, the people who do capital cases are the most dedicated. Assistant public defenders with the most training. You have to be certified to be able to handle those cases. They were very happy with that decision. A bill that will pass the legislature this session changes that, completely reverses it, and allows non-unanimous juries to recommend death. And even if the jury recommends life, the judge can override it by just making findings. So findings that he believes or she believes that the death penalty should be imposed based on the factors enumerated in the statute. So that's, I think that's a direct response to the Parkland shooting case, where there were 3 jurors, not 1, there were 3 that voted for life. But that bill is a direct response to that case and the outrage that the community felt, understandably, about the outcome of that case. So death penalty is a political issue. There's really good people on both sides of the debate that believe, for it, against it. The public defenders are against it. And so that bill to us is a regression in law, because, this countries have eliminated the death penalty, and many states in our own country have eliminated the death penalty. And this is sort of this will result in more death sentences in the state of Florida. So take that home and debate it over the dining room table. Yeah.
I'm sorry, isn't the death penalty more expensive than life in prison?
Yes, the death penalty is more expensive than life in prison.
It still is.
Yes, it is. So that's out there. And I know that there will be people that disagree with me, and that is okay, because one of the things I love about our community is that we can talk about things and we can disagree and we can be civil and understand each other's viewpoint. And so that will pass this year, though, for sure. Good bill by one of our local reps, Rep Henson. Maybe people would disagree about this too, but she's filed a bill. I don't know if it'll get any traction, but she's filed a bill to address the issue of juveniles getting a hold of guns. So I'm not going to quiz Sheriff Darnell, but how do you think most kids get a hold of guns? It's probably a gun in their home, right, that their parents has that's unsecured, or they break into a car. They break into a car and take a gun, right? So her bill addresses the car part, which basically, if it passed, it would require gun owners to lock their gun in the car. So not just have the car locked, but have the gun locked in a glove box or locked in one. You can buy these little security boxes that have a cable that strap onto the frame of the seat of your car, so that if a kid smashes and grabs or you leave your door unlocked, they're not all of a sudden in possession of your firearm. I am maybe I shouldn't say this here. I'm a gun owner. I'm in favor of, people being able to lawfully possess firearms, but I'm also in favor of reasonable regulations on, especially on the use, of course, and the storage of them. And I think that this would be a great improvement. It needs some tweaking, which I was going to talk to her about in the coming weeks, just on like, what's the enforcement mechanism, or what happens if someone's car is broken into and it wasn't secure. And there's a lot of little details, but the concept of it in my book is good. Don't just leave your gun laying around your car where somebody can just get a hold of it real easy. That seems like self-evident. Yes.
I know a lot of.
Well, it's up to the person, but yeah, most cars have locking center consoles. That's all you'd have to do is put it in the center console, lock the center console. At least that's another step that someone would have to go through before they just get a hold of a firearm and it ends up on the street. So, that's, yes.
So this is separate from the.
Mhm.
Something like that. Maybe that's the way to approach that on the government and the government on the law schools or whatever to enhance the law.
Mhm. Yes. Loan forgiveness is a topic, and there is loan forgiveness, but it's 10 years of continuous service and no break in service, and also no missed payments on the loan during that. I think it's 120 consecutive months or something like that. And it's only applies to federal loans. So there is something there. And I have had, and I think that President Biden's recent clarifications on it have assisted. I have had a couple people who've had their loans forgiven, but it's our young lawyers aren't thinking that far out. So I think a modification could be if we could shorten that time frame, or have more of like a prorated, so in your first 5 years, the loan forgiveness chunks are bigger, right? And then even if you left, you've gotten a bunch forgiven, and then you can move on to private practice. But I think that's an avenue that we could work and improve on the loan forgiveness programs that are in existence. Now, I don't know how you address private lenders, but I don't know what the percentage of private lenders is to federal loans. But yes, that's something actually that came up in a meeting in Tallahassee this week. One of the legislators brought it up. So we're going to look at it.
More beneficial, but I mean, there may be so much.
Right. Mhm. Yes, I think that would definitely be an avenue of attack. Yes. You would, I did not bring that with me, but it's over $100,000. And that's only for 3 years. And I'm sorry, I don't have that exact number on me, but. Right. It's tough. And if you look at what rents are as a percentage of income, one of the stories that the public defender from Miami tells is that, especially Miami, where it's hyper competitive and hyper expensive to try to find housing, that we always know about like first month, last month security deposit, right? Well, that's a big chunk of money if the average, 1-bedroom apartment is $2,500 a week. I mean, a month, sorry. But a lot of the agencies now want to see, well, what is it as a percentage of your take-home pay every month? And that your rent needs to be a certain percentage of your take-home pay. And that's where the low salaries really hit home, because if you're only taking home $4,000 a month, sounds like ridiculous, but that's about what it would be. Well, that over half of your take-home pay would be in rent, and that's not the percentage they're looking for. They're looking for more like a third. So it's a real problem. Housing, as we know, is a huge problem even in our community, and housing and low salaries for professional employees. I mean, these are people with 7 years of education, and we're asking them to work a very hard job for not a lot of money. We've got to do more to try to keep them longer. Yes.
And I just want to make sure that, thank you. And your
Thanks.
professionalism, and how you were here, but also the real estate wise. 17th inside, in the state of Florida, but I leave it to Stacy, next to the most popular circuit. And she has done an exceptional job. I've seen her since her early years. Exceptional job. That's the persistence of being a challenging role.
All right, well, I'm happy to stay after and talk more, or come back again and talk about more specific topics. We kind of went, from A to Z, but
Definitely. Would you be?